Although he initially hated his name, John Henry Irons II grew to be a recognizable young local baseball star in Indiana, where he, along with his 11-year-old brother, Clay, would make the gruesome discovery of their grandparents' lifeless body in the living room, which John Henry knew was premeditated murder by racist white folks in retaliation for his parents, who was out of town being representations to the National Black Political Convention. However, the local police thought otherwise, believing it was a robbery gone wrong, as Sheriff Wilson went on to give John Henry advice on the best way to keep his family safe was to be rich and powerful. So as time progressed, during a baseball game where John Henry, his little brother Clay, and their parents were attending, John Henry overheard two white teens talking about how the sport can bring in a player millions of dollars. So John Henry decided he would use baseball as his blueprint to gain wealth and power, since he was already gifted in the sport. So when he went on to play the following week, unfortunately, his parents couldn't attend the game because John's coach would sadly reveal they were tragically killed in a fatal car wreck after their car brakes mysteriously went out, which John Henry next had to relay the bad news to his little brother, who was supposed to be in the car that fatal day if it wasn't for John Henry inviting him to watch his game. Moreover, John Henry and Clay would move in with their other grandparents, who were musicians Bess and Butter, at the brand new Abraham Lincoln Projects in Washington, D.C., where John Henry would go on to become an all-around athlete and play for his high school football team as a star punter before he began to take science seriously. After his teacher, Mr. Stan Jones, explained to him how he can insert it into sports to perfect his craft. Meanwhile, Clay unfortunately fell in with a gang called the Dragons and started doing drugs before impregnating a young girl by the name of Bogdanove, who he later decided to marry at his age of 16. Furthermore, John Henry will receive a full scholarship to the University of Michigan before Bogdanove gave birth to a healthy baby boy they would name Jamal. Succeeding this, John Henry will go on to major in physics while playing college football as a star quarterback for the Wolverines, where he will meet and befriend Guy Gardner, who was majoring in physical education. Unsurprisingly, thereafter, Clay would get his wife pregnant once again, this time with a beautiful baby girl they would name Natasha. Moreover, John Henry would be inspired by the Nobel-winning physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project and solved the mystery of the Challenger disaster, Richard Feynman, a great bongo drums player who can crack any safe combination. So John Henry went on to make an impression with the outcome of his study of projectiles and firearms by inventing a powerful weapon he called the BG-20, which caught the attention of his physics teacher, Dr. Smee, who recommended his talent to Colonel Thomas Weston so he could join AmerTek's military industrial armament division. However, John Henry was more interested in going to the higher education institution of Harvard. Unfortunately, later, tragedy would strike again, this time at the end of his college course, when he received an emergency phone call in class on the tragic passing of his little brother he was always protected of, Clay, after what police believe was a drug-related drive-by outside of the grocery store he was working at. So later at Clay's funeral, John Henry will blame himself for all the deaths in his family, feeling like he could have prevented them from happening hadn't he consumed himself with the thought of becoming both rich and powerful. So he decided from then on not to continue with attending grad school, but instead just focus on becoming rich in order to move his family out the projects. So John Henry took a job from Louis Lane's father, the Secretary of Defense, General Sam Lane, in Metropolis, to use their resources to create a weapon capable of protecting the Earth from an alien invasion. So John Henry went on to create a war suit he called Metal Zero, while secretly keeping a prototype for himself before later resigning after Lex Luthor got involved with his inhumane behaviors. Thereafter, he would help Superman take down John Corbin, infamously known as the supervillain Metallo, an invulnerable cyborg with superhuman strength who uses his kryptonite power source against Superman, along with Kryptonite Man, who emits a deadly green radiation of kryptonite that could kill Superman. Furthermore, John Henry will go on to establish a humanitarian nonprofit and dedicate much of his time to helping those in need in less developed countries, before he eventually moved back home and accepted the high-paying job to work for AmerTek and invent impressive ballistic weapons while catching the eye of the computer imaging specialist Dr. Angora Lapin. Nonetheless, John Henry will realize his new BG-60 model had the potential to cause catastrophic destruction. However, the colonel assured him his weapon will only be used to protect America, before rewarding him with a financial incentive that he would later use to put a down payment on a townhouse for his grandparents, while using his free time to secretly use AmerTek's resources and build a new weapon at his rented workshop, so he could present and sell it to them, which he would go against that idea and instead build another armor suit of his own after continuously dreaming about a flying superhero named Steel. Nevertheless, he would work rigorously on a sturdy, non-lethal suit of armor while going over all the calculations before, to his surprise, the suit of armor managed to successfully blast off into the skies with no problems during the test flight, when he realized he better go incognito if he didn't want to attract any unwanted attention, until he spotted a deadly altercation on a rooftop between a minor drug lord from Brazil named Louise and a gang leader named Manuel Cabral. Interestingly enough, Manuel had telekinetic powers that inadvertently reflected gunshot bullets towards John Henry, who luckily survived the multiple impacts that his now dented armor received, before reflecting the bullets when he attempted to intervene in the one-sided battle that now caused him to get attacked by Manuel. So John Henry had to improvise by breaking off a piece of chimney to use as a projectile to distract Manuel and get an opening to land a solid punch that would send Manuel flying off the rooftop, before he used his kinetic powers to take Louise with him, while John Henry continued the battle into the skies. However, Manuel's plan was to use Louise as a diversion so he could escape when he sent Louise tumbling down from the sky, which John Henry had no choice but to divert his attention towards and try to rescue him before he fell to his death. However, it would be too late, as Manuel already strangled Louise to death, crushing his windpipe by using his kinetic powers when he released him. Subsequently, John Henry had to quickly leave before the local authorities saw him and tried to take him in for questioning, even though he did contemplate and staying as a witness. Following this, John Henry would encounter Angora, who was waiting for him back at his workshop while admiring his suit of armor and seductively suggesting he sold it to AmerTek so they could put it into distribution for American soldiers, while she gave him another bonus so he could pay off his family townhouse, which he did. Therefore, on John Henry's 27th birthday, he lovingly gifted his grandparents the deed to the townhouse after paying off the mortgage, while during this time, Superman was continuously making a name for himself in the media and receiving national attention. Furthermore, John Henry would discover his BG-60 model weapons were being illegally routed by AmerTek for terrorists in Kuwait, which took the life of innocent women and children, so he decided to resign from the company after discovering it was corrupted, and went on to delete the design instructions for the BG-80 and armor modifications from his computer after Colonel Weston, who he looked up to like a father figure, threatened his life if he walked away from his so-called obligations. Unsurprisingly, John Henry kept backup files in a fireproof safe at his workshop. Nonetheless, AmerTek would send henchmen fitted in suits of armor there by way of Angora, who double-crossed John Henry by revealing the location to the colonel so they could confiscate his safe, after they went on to blow up the workshop, hoping to end John Henry's life. Fortunately, they weren't able to retrieve the safe since John Henry survived the attack, and next decided to get his family out of harm's way by faking his own death with the help of his grandparents, as he then went into hiding in Metropolis after moving his safe to a new secret location. So now in the city of tomorrow, John Henry changed his alias to Henry Johnson and rented a workshop in a basement of a building owned by a fortune teller named Rosie in exchange to do maintenance work on the property, while he also worked a construction job in the city where he occasionally saw Superman going about his daily heroism, wishing he himself could have saved the lives of his deceased loved ones, when suddenly one of his co-workers named Pete Skywalker slipped and fell from the high steel construction site, so John Henry impressively sprung into action by tying a cable to his arm from a steel beam in order to swing and catch Pete in mid-air before landing him to safety on a platform. However, the hook that was holding the cable suddenly came loose, causing John Henry to plummet to his certain doom while his life flashed before his eyes, when luckily Superman came to his rescue, which John Henry will go on to thank, and after become inspired by Superman's words of encouragement to make his life count for something. So instead of being obsessed with solely working on his intentions, he made time to be involved with the urban youth in the community. So as time progressed, when John Henry was at work, he and his crew was ordered to abandon the building after Superman was battling a seemingly unstoppable behemoth named Doomsday, who adapts his physical form to overcome and destroy anything or anyone in his path. Interestingly enough, John Henry grabbed a sledgehammer in an attempt to aid Superman, only to be knocked unconscious by falling rubble from the collapsing building caused by Doomsday, who ruptured a gas main before it exploded. So when John Henry finally regained consciousness hours later beneath an unfinished basement, he was informed by the local authorities Doomsday was dead, but not before he killed Superman. Succeeding this, John Henry felt telling inspiration stories and playing basketball with the youth wasn't enough to guide them in a positive path through life, when out of nowhere, one of his youth named Zoid was shot and killed in a drive-by right in front of him by the Synapse Sharks gang, who was using what looked like the weapon design of his BG-80 that the streets named the Toastmaster, as he managed to save his other two youth, Keith and Arthur, before bravely or possibly foolishly pursued the vehicle on foot while risking his life when he leaped towards the passenger window and forcefully disarmed the assailant before being flung off the vehicle and landing on the hard concrete. Following this, now at the hospital recovering from his injuries, he would get a visit from Keith and an admirer by the name of Myra, who had a strong feeling of romantic love for him. Thereafter, when John Henry was released from the hospital, all he could think about is making a difference in the world after what Superman told him. So he went on to work rigorously, creating a fire and bulletproof steel suit of armor in his basement, added with a cape in memory of Superman, along with a hammer and a permanent mechanical fastener to honor the African-American folk hero he was named after, that challenged a brand new steam-powered rock drill against his 20-pound hammer to a race in order to prove that the black worker could drill a hole through the rock for explosives to construct railroad tunnels further and faster than the machine could, which he would go on to prove by winning, but not without consequences, when sadly he died after his heart gave out from all the stress. Moreover, John Henry Irons would now become the superhero called Steel, when not long after, the Synapse Sharks firebombed his home, hitting the oil reservoir and putting Rosie's life in danger. After the gang learned John Henry was released from the hospital about a week ago. Nonetheless, Steel rescued Rosie before going after the Sharks in the suicide slum area of Metropolis, causing havoc amongst the gangs in his one-man war on crime, while still searching for the supplier of his stolen weapons designs, subconsciously hoping it wasn't Angora, which would lead him in a two-way battle between the Reavers and Skull's gang on Metropolis waterfront, where he would save the life of Lois Lane, who fell out the Daily Planet's helicopter after it exploded from an attack meant for the arriving clone of Superman, Con-El, also known as Superboy, whose reckless behavior caused the goons to get away, and the death of the helicopter pilot Frank. Furthermore, Steel confronted Superboy for being irresponsible and self-absorbed and trying to prove he was the new Superman. Interestingly enough, Lois Lane felt Steel should be the hero of Metropolis, since he had the same type of spirit as Superman. Following this, Lex Luthor would send his goon squad to call Steel with information about the whereabouts of the supplier of his stolen weapon designs, known only as the White Rabbit, who was located at the Metro Spire penthouse, while also offering him a proposition to be represented by him as the new hero of Metropolis, which the Eradicator, David Connor, along with Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw, and Superboy were fighting for. However, Steel wasn't interested, but only on his objective. Moreover, Lex secretly attached a listening device on his armor before Steel left, and eventually encountered the White Rabbit, who was ironically expecting his arrival, before revealing herself to be the beautiful and seductive Angora herself, who once again tried to seduce John Henry, while offering him 20% royalty after promotional expenses of the profit she makes selling his invention. Unsurprisingly, John Henry didn't fall for her persuasion or sexual advancements this time, before she made it known she had hacked and retrieved the patent for his BG-80 from his computer the night she snuck into his workshop, before making minor improvements to the design, as she suddenly pulled out the powerful weapon and shot him out the penthouse window. Meanwhile, Superboy, who was prior following Steel in order to apologize, saw when she shot him into a tanker truck carrying gasoline, which simultaneously destroyed Lex Luthor's listening device, but not before he found out Steel's secret identity. So Superboy quickly rescued Steel before thinking he would burn to death from the fire explosion. Nevertheless, they joined forces to go after Angora, who unsurprisingly already escaped from the penthouse. Meanwhile, in Metropolis, the Eradicator and Cyborg Superman began to each gain a loyal and unhealthy following of supporters who started to clash out against one another, claiming their idol was the real representation of Superman. As the Eradicator, an invention created by Kal-El's ancestor that took up a humanoid form based on Superman's own, attacked Steel in California for using the Superman insignia, even though the conman Rex Leach claimed to own the trademark and the title. Interestingly enough, the Eradicator held back his punches against Steel, not wanting to end his life, but allowing Steel to overpower him after realizing Steel was in the right. So the Eradicator next retreated. Succeeding this, Steel will find himself being ambushed at the Metropolis International Airport by goons of Angora, who he swiftly defeated without much effort, when suddenly Angora's last henchman, Graham, shockingly jumped towards Steel, while altering his body size into a morbidly obese monstrosity in order to crush Steel under his weight. However, that wasn't enough to stop our hero, who used his rocket propelled boots to leg press Graham and activate the propulsion that quickly made Graham fall back in pain before he oddly started consuming jet fuel after, which Steel wasn't going to stay around to see what that meant when he grabbed Angora and flew her away for questioning, which she would reveal she used the old abandoned oyster plant to manufacture the Toastmasters before she deviously activated a steel lifting crane hook to strike Steel against the weakened building so she could flee, but not before also activating a bomb that was also designed by him. Subsequently, Steel would free himself from the rubble, which simultaneously caused the building to collapse, with heavy debris falling on Angora, trapping her beneath, before the bomb detonated, destroying the facility with her inside. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Cyborg Superman and an alien named Mongol destroyed Coast City and replaced it with its own called Engine City, while abducting Superboy in order to do the same to Metropolis. Furthermore, Steel would encounter Lois Lane at O'Hare Airport when he was heading to see what was going on in Coast City, when his trip was abruptly interrupted when he spotted Supergirl Kara Zor-El flying across the Oaktown section towards the waterfront, where she would go on to fight a giant Kryptonian tank battle suit while Lex Luthor was present, as Superboy next showed up after managing to escape from Cyborg Superman, while disclosing Cyborg Superman may have killed the Eradicator. Furthermore, Steel also took on and managed to defeat the Kryptonian tank of armor, when shockingly the suit's hard upper protective shell opened, revealing the long thought dead Kal-El, who was now wearing an all-black suit with his powers completely depleted after being resurrected by the Eradicator, who was still alive. Nevertheless, after much discussion, our heroes banded together and went after Cyborg Superman in Coast City to prevent him from turning Earth into a planet-sized engine of destruction known as Warworld that would be equipped with a vast area of weapon systems so it could roam through space conquering planets. Furthermore, our heroes did a full-on assault on Cyborg Superman's command center and power station before Superboy went to deflect a missile meant to destroy Metropolis. So Cyborg Superman couldn't create a second engine there. Meanwhile, back at Coast City, Steel brought the grinding, mechanical behemoth engine to a stop from propelling Earth out of control into outer space, but at a great personal cost of his suit being destroyed. But he still continued on, refusing to give up the fight, as Supergirl came to assist, as well as the Green Lantern Hal Jordan, who took on and defeated the brute Mongol, while Kal-El, along with the returning Eradicator, helped defeat Cyborg Superman in a grueling battle, where the Eradicator exuded his energy into Kal-El, returning him to full power as Superman. Succeeding this, an injured Steel, along with Supergirl, Superboy, and an incapacitated Eradicator, would return to Metropolis. Outside the Science and Technology Advanced Research Laboratories, also known as Star Labs. Interestingly enough, Supergirl would give Steel a kiss on the lips before her and Superboy bid him farewell as they flew away on another journey. So not long after, John Henry would retire from being Steel since Superman had returned. However, to his surprise, he would later be invited to Lex Luthor's private celebration to welcome back Superman, which he wouldn't attend. Succeeding this, and now fully healed, John Henry would continue his mission to remove all the Toastmasters off the streets without the use of his armor, when one day he was unexpectedly assisted by Superman outside a condemned sanitation building, before John Henry decided to head back to Washington, D.C. after 5 years to see his family and finally confront Colonel Weston and end his AmerTek operation. So when he made it back home, he he was greeted by his niece, Natasha, who was now 13 years old, when suddenly the bus he was riding on exploded from a hail of gunfire from a BG-80 during a drive-by that killed several people because of the bus station being placed in rival gang territory. Unsurprisingly, a fed-up John Henry pursued the vehicle on foot before tossing his duffel bag at the hood of the car, smashing it, which caused the driver to veer out of control and crash into a light pole. So John Henry next went on to disarm the goon from the Central Avenue Skulls gang, when out of nowhere he was struck in the face by a massive fist from a member of the E Street gang who was on a drug called Tar that temporarily grants the user super strength and non-invulnerability before he shockingly spotted his nephew Jamal amongst the Skulls gang, fleeing the scene before John Henry was knocked out by one of the Tar freaks and later woke up with paramedics at his side along with his niece. Following this, when John Henry and Natasha made it back home, he was greeted with open arms by his grandparents and sister-in-law, when surprisingly over dinner with his other nephew, Paco, along with foster siblings, Tyke and his sister Darlene attending, John Henry's grandparents revealed they knew he was the Black Superman still. Thereafter, when Jamal finally showed up at his uncle's welcome home party, the resident was suddenly attacked by AmerTek goons dressed in armor designed by John Henry, looking to apprehend him while injuring his granddad in the process. So with a minor assist from Grandma Bess, John Henry defeated the AmerTek goons before coming to the realization he had to do something quick before something bad happens to his family. So he used the armor from one of the henchmen and improved on it, using a more refined process that after days later in his grandparents' basement, he crafted and forged a new suit of armor to once again become the superhero Steel and declare war on AmerTek, but not before interfering in another turf war between the East Streeters and Skulls, who were leaving the Beacon movie theater with Jamal. So after Steel defused the situation and caused the teens to scatter like roaches when the lights turns on, he grabbed and took Jamal to a rooftop nearby to give him a stern talking about the dangers of being in a gang and the use of the BG-80 weapon he created. Then next made him confess to his grandparents about his gang involvement. Furthermore, Steel will go on to force one of the Skull's young gang members named Spiral to snitch about a weapons deal taking place at Griffin Park that night, which Steel went on to intercept the transaction between the leader of the Skulls gang, Cowboy, and the Synav Sharks before confiscating the weapon. Subsequently, Steel will later find himself rescuing Jamal from the leader of the Synav Sharks gang, Doc Bundy, also known as Amalgam, who had a cybernetic arm, after Jamal was framed by Spiral for being the one who snitched about the weapons deal. Consequently enough, Amalgam will be arrested by the local authorities, but not before taking the life of Spiral after finding out the truth. Furthermore, Steel will head to AmerTek and confront Colonel Weston on why his company that's listed on the stock exchange and has military contracts worth millions will sell guns and drugs to children in the ghetto, which the Colonel will claim no involvement in knowing and will investigate the allegations while simultaneously learning Steel was actually his former employee. Nevertheless, Steel will later break into AmerTek, fully knowing beforehand that they were expecting his arrival, so he created a diversion on one side of the building in order to quietly infiltrate the other side, where the Colonel's office was located, so he can hack into his personal computer that was linked to all the networks in the facility. So not long after downloading the files, he will be met with a surprise attack by AmerTek's goons in armor, causing all hell to break out, with the goons trying to end his life, but luckily only managing to overheat his armor with multiple gunshots from the BG-80s. However, the armor managed to withstand the extreme temperature before, to Steel's surprise, the Colonel arrived and validated his involvement, while next commanding his men to capture Steel. Nonetheless, his plan would be foiled when Steel couldn't be contained. So during the battle, they inadvertently ruptured the building's fuel line, causing it to explode, but not before the Colonel's men took him to safety, while Steel was ejected from the building and into a lake below, where he would go on to recover, as AmerTek's national headquarters was now destroyed. Succeeding this, John Henry would attend Spiral's memorial service with family and friends. However, unsurprisingly, Cowboy and his henchman Jack will also be present to show their respects, when suddenly a massive man crashed through the building on a new version of the powerful addictive drug called Super Tar that extremely distorts the skull while increasing the body's mass and making one strong enough to break an 8-inch steel beam with an uncontrollable urge to act out their anger physically. However, after several doses, the subject will flatline from internal hemorrhaging. Interestingly enough, it was the colonel who bailed Amalgam out of jail and had him give one of his expendable goons the S-Tar to attack John Henry at the funeral service. Unsurprisingly, John Henry would outlast the Tar freaking battle before the drug wore off. Succeeding this, a firefight would take place at Frank's Arcade on Blank Street between the East Streeters and the Skulls before Steele showed up on the scene and saved Louis Lane's friend he prior contacted, Lieutenant Shauna Barrow, a computer specialist for DC's Commercial Crimes Unit that was caught in the crossfire before he handed over the downloaded files to her so he could finally bring down the colonel. As he went on to pin the goons to a wooden fence, using reverence, he shot off his gauntlets to hold them in place until the authorities arrived. Unfortunately, thereafter, Kite would tragically be a victim of a drive-by shooting and walking home with Jamal after leaving the grocery store, which would leave him paralyzed. While ironically not long after, Natasha would too be a victim of that same blue 89 BMW, believed to be driven by a member of the East Streeters when it struck her and left her with a broken leg after she was rollerblading home from school. And then later, her mother, Blondo, would be viciously dragged and attacked in an alley by a tar freak. Luckily enough, Steele was 2 blocks away when he heard her screaming, and went on to severely injure the superpowered goon by shooting rivets that went in and out his arm as he quickly fled the scene. Succeeding this, a angered Jamal would take S-Tar to retaliate against Amalgam. After uncovering he was hired by the colonel to have Jamal's gang take out his whole family before they cover up their tracks by painting the BMW red. Nevertheless, Cowboy took the original, less addictive version of the tar drug in order to try and defeat Jamal, which he failed, when suddenly Steele showed up to intervene, only to be attacked by his nephew in a family feud, where Jamal blamed his uncle for all the bad things that were happening to their family, which Steele replied his mission was to stop the cause of all the gang violence by removing all the BG-80s off the streets, as he delayed time so the drug could run its course in Jamal's system before he reverted back to his normal self. And next, he rushed to the hospital by his uncle to the emergency room. Following this, Steele will go on to finally put an end to the colonel after he started messing with his family, as Steele went on a collision course against anyone who tries to get in his way, as he dodged everything that was thrown at him by the colonel's men, before snatching up the colonel himself from the rooftop of an AmerTek building to end his life for all the horrendous crimes he committed. However, luckily for the colonel, Lieutenant Barrow showed up with a police squad to issue a warrant for the colonel's arrest before Steele could act out his deepest desire. Nevertheless, Steele would finally receive justice when he finally brought the colonel down and ended the first chapter of his life struggles that would only be the start of his superhero saga.